Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
Amy Leach is a theatre director and associate director at Leeds Playhouse. She's directed a large number of highly acclaimed productions, from small-scale new writing to Shakespeare to main-stage Christmas shows. She and her team are now approaching opening night for a new version of Oliver Twist, adapted by Bryony Lavery for Leeds Playhouse in collaboration with the Ramps on the Moon consortium. Benjamin Wilson plays the part of Mr. Bumble in this production, and he joins us too to talk about the show. Ben has had a key role in developing the audio description for this and a number of other productions he's worked on at Leeds Playhouse and the Sheffield Crucible. Amy and Ben, thanks for joining us.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you very much.
I wondered if you could just start by telling us a bit about your own association and your sort of background, your work with Leeds Playhouse to date, and maybe Amy.
Absolutely. So I started working at Leeds Playhouse as a freelance director about 5 years ago, and then almost 3 years ago I became the associate director here. So I had a real privilege of getting to direct 4 shows before I became associate and got to really know the building. And I had always been a freelance director before starting here as associate director, and for me there was something about Leeds Playhouse that is so rooted in the community, in serving the city of Leeds and the region of Leeds, that for me it felt like I'd found a kind of theatrical home, I suppose, and so I was absolutely delighted to get the role of associate director here. And it's been an extraordinary thing, particularly thinking about this production and the fact that this production aims to be as accessible and inclusive as possible, that I've been able to go on a real journey here, supported by the extraordinary team that we've got, to really push the boundaries in terms of what we can achieve for particularly deaf and disabled audiences and artists. And so I think this is an amazing organisation from that point of view, that there's such willing to just do as much as we can to open it up for everybody and to be open for all.
Thanks, and we'll certainly talk more about that and about Ramps on the Moon initiative. Ben, how about you? What's your history with the Playhouse?
Yeah, so I suppose this is my first time here as an actor, but a couple of years ago Amy brought me over as an audio description director to work on road, which was really, really exciting. And I lived in West Yorkshire for a long time, so it's a theatre that I know and love, both as an audience member, but also I've done various bits of sort of artist development stuff here over the years as well. So yeah, but I have more of a long-term working relationship with Ramps on the Moon more broadly than Leeds Playhouse specifically, because I've been the agent for change at Sheffield Theatres for the last few years. Because part of Ramps on the Moon, the way I always describe it is there's sort of 2 strands to Ramps on the Moon. So it's this consortium of 6 theatres, and every year for the length of the project a show will tour around the 6 theatres. That show will be like a mainstream, main stage platform for deaf and disabled talent, and integrate creatively things like sign language and audio description and captioning, so that those shows are as bold and innovative with access and as accessible as possible. But then I think the more important strand is the sort of second one, which is to use Ramps as those shows as the sort of inspiration for more long-term change within those 6 organisations and the industry more broadly. And as part of that, each of the theatres has an agent for change who is a deaf or disabled person or artist or theatre lover who can come in and be part of the team and help inspire that change and make that change happen. So for the last couple of years that's been me at Sheffield, and that's sort of my relationship with Ramps on the Moon. I've really enjoyed being at Sheffield and receiving the Ramps on the Moon shows. They're always like a really important catalyst for some really exciting things happening within the organisation, so it's now really cool to get the chance to be on the other side of that and be working on one of those shows and going to those 6 theatres and being that catalyst and inspiration.
So tell me a bit more about how access is incorporated in those creative ways into these processes. I've seen, I think, at least one of the Ramps on the Moon's productions before. I saw Our Country's Good a few years ago, and I was really taken by all the strands of access that were incorporated so fluidly into that, so creatively. I wonder if either of you could sort of speak to that process a bit.
Yeah, so I suppose as a blind theatre goer who relies quite heavily on audio description, I often get quite frustrated with audio description, and that isn't sort of to speak negatively of people who do the audio description. The audio describers, they work really, really hard, and it's a real skill and a real, it takes a lot of years of practice to get really good at audio describing a show. But I always get frustrated when the audio description feels completely separate from the show. It's always the same. It's always a nice sort of clear RP voice, no matter what the show is. And to this day, it blows my mind how few directors, writers, creatives, producers, everyone, how few people actually listen to the audio description on their shows. when, admittedly not a huge percentage of your audience, but a percentage of your audience, their entire experience of your show is being determined by this element. Why wouldn't you want to get stuck in and get really hands-on? And I always think that when I've seen people like Amy do exactly that and get excited about the possibilities of audio description, that there are some really exciting choices you can make and add extra layers you can add to your show when you embrace those things as tools in your arsenal as an artist, rather than just a sort of a bolted-on afterthought. Because when it is a bolted-on afterthought, the fact of the matter is, it feels like my experience is less important than everybody else's, which isn't very fair, isn't a very good feeling. And so, and I know, speaking to some of the deaf people in the cast, some of the deaf actors in the cast, they feel exactly the same about sign language and captioning, in that it should be the most effective way to make a show accessible and entertaining to deaf and disabled audiences is to embrace those as really exciting creative things. So, rather than there being someone stood on the side of the stage in a nice spotlight interpreting the show into sign language, there are sign language using characters integrated into the show, into the world of the show, so that whether you're deaf or hearing, whether you use BSL as your first language or if you use English as your first language, then both sets of people are getting an equal experience. And same with audio description, that if it's integrated creatively into the show, then everyone is getting as exciting and vibrant an opportunity and experience of the show, which is not only more accessible, but more importantly to me, it's more engaging and more interesting. I always say that it's great to be given access to a show, but which of us really goes to the theatre and comes out going, it was great, I could get in and I could understand. I was given access to it. We go because we want to be entertained and engaged. So that's what I want from my audio description or my BSL interpretation or the captioning, as much as every other element of the show. I want it to be a well-crafted experience.
Amy, is this something that you've found yourself increasingly thinking about in your work? How did you first come to the importance of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually, I've told this story before, but Ben, we went to a kind of a day-long conference, didn't we? A Ramps on the Moon conference about 3 years ago when we first met that day. And we were stood in the buffet queue together, and Ben was telling me about his experiences of audio description and what that was like. And I realised to my shame that I was one of those directors that Ben's mentioning. I'd never listened to the audio description on any show I directed. And I think there's also a kind of problem that, particularly as a freelance director, you're contracted till the press night and then you go. And then actually often those things happen afterwards. They're not booked through the creative side of a theatre. They're often the front of house responsibility. And I couldn't believe it. I felt so ashamed having talked to Ben. So I went away, and then the next show I did, I listened to the audio description, and I was, like you say, the people that do that audio description, they work so hard, they put so many hours in, but I was a bit I was really cross with myself that I hadn't had any input. So then the next show that I was directing was Road, and I asked Ben if he would come on board as an audio description director, along with the very brilliant Vicky Ackroyd, who's an audio describer, a trained audio describer, and together we went on a bit of a journey, didn't we? Absolutely. Where we had a phone box on stage that whenever characters, obviously it's a play full of duologues and monologues, so we always had actors spare. So whenever they weren't in a scene, we had actors in character disappearing into this kind of 1980s phone box and describing down a phone, old 80s phone, what was going on, but in the voice of a Jim Cartwright character, so effing and blinding and dirty language. And it was just marvellous, and it taught us so much, didn't it? And actually 4 of those actors that were in that show have actually created a theatre company called Hear the Picture to now offer actor services to make more creative audio description. And then again, I did another show, There Are No Beginnings, which was a brand new play by the brilliant Charlie Miles. Charlie's writing is already so descriptive. She's like, you could put it on the radio quite easily because of how descriptive her scenes are. And again, that time worked with the brilliant Chloe Clark, who is also working on Oliver Twist. And again, worked with Chloe and with Vicky and with that, all the audio description was just part of the play. Nobody had to wear headsets. It was just part of the actual everybody's experience. So actually, if you didn't need that access side of things, you just would have you wouldn't have noticed, and nobody had to wear headsets, and so that was really exciting as well. And so I've been on a real journey, because also in terms of thinking about deaf audiences, I just did a Christmas show that was completely deaf friendly. We turned one of the characters into a deaf character. We completely integrated sign language into that. So it has been a real journey, and I feel like what Ben's saying about thinking about access less as an access tool and more as a creative layer, I genuinely feel like I've discovered a whole new layer of paints in my paint box as a director, and that's super exciting. And so it's pushing me creatively rather than just kind of thinking of it as a bolt-on as well. And so this show is epic because we're trying to do it all on a very big, epic show. So it's challenging. It's not to kind of deny that actually, you know, when we've got scenes in Oliver Twist where you've got characters just purely signing to each other because they're all deaf, well, then you're like, well, hang on, if you're blind, how on earth would you know what was going on? So how can we creatively help with that experience? And vice versa, scenes where you've got lots of English speakers kind of, you know, talking away. Well, how do you make that then accessible for a deaf audience? So it is really challenging, but exhilarating as well. Yeah.
I mean, I just had to point out there the difference between me and Amy there when she said paints in paint box and I said weapons in arsenal. But here, the picture we just talked about there, after doing Road, I remember when Amy first described the idea for Road and what she wanted to do with the audio description, I got so excited about it. And I thought, oh, I mean, it's a great idea, but are the actors going to get on board with doing this, having this extra job? And now, 3 years later, they're still doing it, and they're still really passionate about it.
Yeah.
So I think it's hugely exciting.
And that's kind of the whole idea of ramps, really, and it's about every moment of change, and some of those moments of success are tiny, you know, they won't get recorded in an evaluation, but yeah, like those actors going off and going, well, we're going to keep on doing this, we really believe in this. I know there are actors working on Oliver Twist who've never worked with other people with disabilities before, and it has like opened everybody's minds to different ways of working, and so that's really exciting. All of those, some of the changes are massive and really visible, and some of the changes are really tiny, but they're all thrilling, aren't they?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this show as well was what you said the other day about how with audio description, because well with BSL interpretation and captioning, it's right there, everyone sees it, it's, you know, you can't miss it. But audio description, if you didn't know it was happening, normally you would have no idea, you'd completely miss it. And so we've got people in the cast who are really experienced in this way of working with access, whether they've done shows with Graeae or Ramps on the Moon and that sort of work, but they've never had to think about audio description because it's still, you know, hidden, separate and over there and hidden. So what's really exciting about this, about it giving responsibility to everyone, there's this amazing line that Bryony's written on the front of the script, that it's just a stage direction saying that everyone is responsible, the us, which is the chorus, they are responsible for everyone's sort of experience of the show. And I really felt that in the rehearsal room. One of the most exciting things is everyone, for the cast and the creative team and the stage management team and everyone, we're all taking ownership of, we're all responsible for everyone's experience of the show, which is such a, you know, it's quite emotional sometimes actually. I still get emotional when I see a room full of people creatively engaging with the task of making our show accessible to blind audiences, because that doesn't happen very often, you know. And so it's an amazing experience to see this room full of brilliant people working towards that. It still feels very new and exciting and wonderful.
Just thinking about the sort of the pallets or weapons, you know, you're kind enough to allow me into the room for a little bit to watch a bit of the rehearsal, and this idea of the different layers that you're layering on, I suppose, really struck me, in that there would be moments when there was real sort of bustle, and you know, it must have been a room of about 20 people or more, sort of some real bustle and hubbub and things, and then it would go completely silent, but people were still communicating furiously and, you know, and fervently just through sign, through BSL. And then there'd be a burst of, you know, let's talk about the audio description, and you were using phrases that really interested me, like can we have a line which will draw the ear to this side of the stage, or, you know, draw, you know, so it's not just drawing the eye, but thinking sort of in terms of audio imagery as well as visual.
Yeah, absolutely.
And could you tell us a bit about your? I would usually use a vision, but I suppose let's think more across the senses. But your idea, your version of Oliver Twist.
Yeah. So one of the things about the Ramps on the Moon projects, when each theatre takes their turn, is that it should be a big title, something that you would be programming in your biggest space with a big company that you're expecting people are going to want to come and see, and that's part and parcel of the Ramps notion, really, isn't it, that they should be those big titles. And so when we were thinking about what might be our title, I've seen all of the previous Ramp shows, and you can't help as a director sit there going, I wonder what I would do if it was me, you know, and then kind of going, oh, actually I'd quite like to have a go, even though it's a bit frightening, and so then thinking, well, what will be the title? And I just kept coming back to the idea of a Dickens. I think Dickens have got such fantastic epic stories. You've got that real ability to, you can have a chorus, so you can have a real sense of an ensemble telling a story. but also you get to see people's range and versatility as well, so people get to play like such different characters, and that's really exciting. I think it's probably fair to say that some actors, that the actors generally can get typecast, and I think that probably happens all the more with disabled and deaf characters. So actually to be able to go, show off your range, you're all so talented. So that felt really important, and just such a cracking story. And I think, Dickens, unfortunately, has still so much to say to now. The world he was describing, 200 years ago is like not actually that different. And so there was lots of really compelling reasons to choose Oliver Twist. And we decided to commission a brand new adaptation rather than using a pre-existing one. That came out of discussions I'd had with particularly learned disabled theatre companies and lots of deaf artists about the inaccessibility of Dickens' language. It's so dense for anybody, and then when BSL is your first language, or you maybe have a learning disability, it's all the harder. So we thought that actually the best thing to do would be to commission a brand new adaptation. The brilliant Bryony came on board, and she has just been so fantastic at just like opening herself up to a whole new way of working. And it meant that then we could be thinking about BSL and captioning and audio description for the word go, and we could then make characters with specific disabilities in mind, rather than kind of adding that on, in a kind of disability blind casting kind of way. We could go, well, what happens if, we're setting a show in the late 1800s, that's just after there's been a big conference in Milan that has banned sign language, which is the history of it. Well, what is the impact then on the deaf characters in this play? What is it like to be a disabled person in this world? And so actually, and then that's brought up lots of new things about the world of Oliver Twist. So you absolutely still get the Oliver Twist story that you know, that you love, that you're expecting, with this added rich layer that relates to some of the characters having disabilities or being deaf within that world. So that's been super, super exciting. I think also, so myself and Hayley, the designer, we've done Dickens before, we've done Christmas Carol, and very much delivered on a kind of, the red velvet world of a Dickens that you would know and love. But again, I think we've been really pushed to think a little bit outside the box. So again, we want to deliver a real Victorian vision. And the design is definitely a very Victorian vision of the world. But actually, Hayley, really interestingly, has also thought about visually impaired audiences within the design. So, Ben, you're probably better to quote this than I am, but I think, am I right in thinking there's only about 3% of people,
something like that, yeah,
it's about that have absolutely no vision at all, and that actually for a lot of visually impaired people, the high contrast, black and white, black and yellow, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. High contrast is massive. Our design has this sort of huge black structure on a white background, which makes it really easy for me to see, with the big, huge, bright screen in the middle of it as well for captioning. But it's also those things of choosing big, bold, contrasting colours. Fagin is all in red, to see that sort of, so I can sort of make out that blur of red there. That's Fagin, and stuff like that. And choosing big, bold colours like that really helps sort of paint a picture like that, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and it's really strong silhouettes, so it's been really interesting, the kind of oversized, ribbons on hats of, and which also is great, if you can see, actually, you're getting this really like that kind of the strong, grotesque shapes of a Dickens that you would expect. But it has, we've kind of thought about our audiences and our actors right through to the design and stuff as well, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I always say, I think, is just adding to that point, is the best way to make a show accessible is to make it a treat for all the senses.
Yeah.
Because if you've got all those senses, then fab, you're getting a great treat. If you don't use one of those senses, then you've still got all these other senses to rely on. I think that's really sort of telling in that sort of bright colour, those bright colours in the design, or those really strong design choices, and the same with sort of the aural storytelling and the visual, all that stuff. Yeah. It's not detracting.
It's like the sound design as well, like really thinking about how, so I know John, our sound designer, and Oliver, our composer, like checking in with Ben about kind of the aural story we're getting through the sound. It's all the more important to locate us in different places, or to kind of provide that kind of the bed of tension if we don't quite know what people are signing, but we get the sense of what's going on in a scene. So that's all, everybody's got to have that, creative access at the forefront of their mind.
It's one of those things I often talk about with audio description. Is one of my big bugbears with audio description that I don't like is when sort of the audio describer forgets how much work the sound design is doing for them. Right. And sort of sometimes I remember, as my job at Sheffield Theatres as the agent for change, working on Life of Pi there last summer and talking to the audio describers who were doing that show and saying that was a hugely visually exciting show, but also the sound design was so beautiful and was doing so much work for you that I don't want you to trample all over that sound design with a bit of description. It's like, no, just let the story is being told there. But that's also a lesson for a show like this is, you can do so much work and tell so much story with a beautiful bit of sound design, a beautiful bit of composition and of music and that sort of thing. And it's let that do the work for you, because it's the old sort of adage when you're writing or creating work is show, don't tell. And that's the same with access, particularly with audio description, is if I can be shown that story through an interesting way of sound design or a bit of dialogue, that's far more interesting than someone, describing this person is walking across the stage and opening a door. If I can be told that in a more interesting way, then that's a far more interesting experience.
Can you think of any moments specifically in this show that additional palette has really opened up for you? Any sort of things that we can look out for, or sort of exciting moments in the rehearsal room that have really struck you?
Well, it's not quite an answer to that question, but it's tangential. It's one of the things that really excites me in the show. It's one of the things when Amy first told me about their ideas for this show that really excited me after the sort of initial sort of R&D period was if we go back to the original Dickens book, there are some horrific moments of violence in that story, some really awful moments, and no one wants to see those violence, so let's audio describe them to people. Let's rely on this other form of storytelling and use that as one of our paints in our on our easel. They are the tools that we're using for the show, so let's use them. And for me, that's so exciting because we're not thinking of audio description there as something used after. This is our way of telling this story. These are one of the tools that we're using, and that's really exciting. I think that's one of the moments for me. I don't know if
I agree with that really, and I think there's moments where actually what we're using are a kind of combination of almost like characters audio describing what their own experience, and at the same time for a deaf audience they're watching really strong visual vernacular, which is a kind of a form of deaf theatre poetry. I'm not going to do it justice in my description of it, but it's kind of like a combination of mime and sign language and storytelling, physical storytelling, and putting those two things together. So we have a couple of moments, I think they're my favourite moments really in the show, where we bring together visual vernacular. So what we've got is a really strong offer for our deaf audiences. We also bring together really interesting audio description. I'm thinking also about Oliver walking to London, for example, and some of it is just about like the breath that people use. Hungry, like the kind of like little moans that people do build up this aural picture. And when you put the two together, of course, if you have all of your senses, you're getting this really interesting theatrical moment, but also I feel like we're absolutely equally delivering for both a deaf and a blind audience. I think those are my favourites.
So it's been a very sort of careful and very involved process. Has it been a very long process?
Yes, I wish it was longer. I mean, that's the thing, it's so layered, so actually it's the longest I've ever had to rehearse a show ever. We've had 6 weeks, which sounds on paper like an epic amount of time, but of course you've got to remember that absolutely everything in the rehearsal room, we're kind of working in 3 languages, because actually audio description, that layer feels like another language, and so often the kind of time it takes to translate everything you're doing in the rehearsal room just takes twice as long. And just the layers of like trying, I think we've set ourselves quite a challenge to make the audio description live as well as all the visual world live, and that's hard. That's really challenging. Not many people have done that before.
It's so ambitious, but what's exciting about
it is really ambitious. So I think I've been thinking about the show for probably a couple of years really, but I would love more time, but then you always say you want more time, don't you, when you make plays, and we've got the time. And I think what we've been saying as well is I don't think the process of adding clarity to the story, both hourly and visually, that's not going to stop on press night in Leeds. We're going off on a tour through till June, and also things will change, things will adapt. We'll have to keep on our toes in terms of making sure that we're keeping on.
And go to 6 very different theatres.
Exactly, and very different theatres. And my goodness, the spaces couldn't be more different. So, quite a bit of reblocking and reshaping at each place as well. So the work won't stop in a couple of weeks.
On that note, Oliver Twist is on at Leeds Playhouse, Quarry Theatre from the 28th of February to the 21st of March, ahead of a UK tour to Birmingham Repertory Theatre, Nottingham Playhouse, Sheffield Theatres, New Wolsey Theatre, Ipswich and Theatre Royal Stratford East, which are all part of the Ramps on the Moon consortium alongside Graeae, the UK's leading disabled-led theatre company. Amy and Benjamin, thank you so much.
Thank you
very much.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.